Hello and welcome back to the Comic Literate podcast, the podcast that does deep dives into the best of comic books, graphic novels, mangas, penny dreadfuls, web comics, newspaper comics, and essentially any single frame illustrations where the characters use bubbles to talk or think. I am your host, as always, the soon-to-be known as Comic Standstill, one day hoping, and with me, as always, is my gregarious host. It's Jamie. Hello, Jamie.
Gregarious.
Yeah, it's the new thing.
I love it.
Yeah, it's going to be better than my joke about being a comic expert and my joke about you being a book expert, because I was like, I'm running out of things. And it's always it's too long anyway, so one word from the thesaurus each week, I think.
Gregarious.
Is
I like gregarious as well. It's a beautiful piece of language.
It sounds kind of Viking-esque. I don't know if that's correct or not.
I don't know the etymology of it. I know what it means. I don't know the etymology.
And you're meant to be the book expert.
I know. It's unfortunate that I don't know the etymology of every piece of vocabulary.
Well, if you could get that in ready for next week and just get the entire etymology of the English language, old versions, new versions we haven't had yet, everything really.
I'll brush up on it.
Yeah, fantastic.
How are you?
Not too bad. We should warn listeners, but as I said earlier, if you don't like cat noises, then this is not the podcast for you today, especially.
My kitten's horny.
There's probably much better ways you could have put that.
She's really horny. I can't help it.
But that is essentially the case, yes.
She's just been rolling around and rubbing herself on things. I'm having her bit scooped out really soon.
Yes, it's the kitten becoming a cat, and with males and females, they go through this stage. And unfortunately for us, it is a bit of a vocal stage.
She's in season and she's just meow.
Yes.
But constantly.
Having done the editing on these podcasts, I feel like of all the noises, that was a prime one. A good example of what I was talking about, which we won't have any more of from this point onwards.
No, I've got a Soda Stream lemonade here. It's all good.
Exactly. And with the editing and the noises that I have taken out, which is just people talking into a mic like it happens, I think you have to be like a several years in the line before, as a podcaster recording whatever, that you just don't do the voices, the sounds naturally. But of all the sounds to edit out of a podcast, a cat meowing in the background, I'm like, that's fine. It's not someone. Chill. It's not eating in the microphone. It's not coughing. It's not sneezing. It's just a gentle meow in the background.
I don't eat while we record anymore.
Anymore. Not after the last incident.
Not after the fuck.
That entire episode was unusable. We had to bin it. Exactly. So, we are going to be looking at a comic in this episode, which will be in the title. You'll see that when it's all done and ready. But first, luckily, there's no news of anyone dying recently, so that's positive.
We're having another 2016. People are dropping like flies at the moment.
I mean...
but nobody comic book related yet.
Yeah, but I have a theory about that, and this isn't even my own theory. I'm pretty sure I've seen this elsewhere, but I think it might have been you, when I was talking to maybe years ago, like probably around 2016 or afterwards. But the reason it seems like in 2016 especially that there were so many celebrities dying was because we've got to the point where there's more celebrities. So 2016 was the turning point of like older celebrities after a boom of celebrities in like the 80s, like when television was more common and music was a lot more pronounced and varied. So you've got more celebrities, and they just started all dying basically in 2016 onwards. So I think every year afterwards is going to seem like, oh my God, there's so many celebrities dying. It's like, because there's so many more of them.
And I think it became a focal point for the news in 2016 to the point that they were recording the death of everybody. Every single celebrity death became noteworthy and something that they had to report on.
Yeah.
Because 2016 was the year of the dead celebrity. It was also the year of Trump and Brexit. Like, we needed something to
chill out on, like
to distract ourselves on.
Yeah, exactly. And I think as well, news, like I've seen a few celebrity deaths like on the front page, like BBC News, and I'm like, I'm surprised their death has made it to the front page.
I think the big one was Jeff Beck, and that hurt me because he's a musician that I really like, and he was a good friend of David Bowie's and died on the same date. So Bowie died on the 10th of January 2016.
Right.
Kicked off the year of the dead celebrity because then Alan Rickman died a few days later.
Lemmy was quite close as well.
Lemmy was quite close.
Yeah.
But yeah, David Bowie died on the 10th of January and Jeff Beck died on the 10th of January. And that's very sad.
Brutal. Well, so there's no death.
Moving swiftly on.
Past the topic of death, But we are going to come back to our favorite segments of the week.
Hey.
We always do your first. Are you happy going first each time, or do you want me to do mine first?
You do yours first. We'll switch it up. I want to hear from you while you've got a cat on you.
I've got a cat on me, so I'm just going to go chuck her over. Not animal cruelty. She lands on her feet all the time, so it's fine.
Got 9 lives, it doesn't matter.
Exactly. And she's still meowing, so it's fine. I will start with my Ryan's moving. There was
comic books where the pictures move so fast.
That's it.
That they become moving images.
Exactly. Yes.
It's something like that. We can just edit the one in from like episode 3 or whatever.
You'd think. Well, at some point we'll have theme tunes. So once
a theme tune.
Once a certain point, I'll have like a sound desk, a sound thing, and I'll press a button. It'll be like. Ryan's moving images.
Every single episode of the podcast will be like a DJ Khaled track.
Yes, exactly.
And another one.
Exactly. And just fart noises on command and everything like that. Yeah, it's gonna be crazy. So yeah, we'll start with mine. I've consumed some films. That's say it correctly. Films. Moving images and the like. I've realized recently that a lot of the films that I watch turn out to be horror films, and I've always considered myself a horror fan, and then I've got a list of films to watch, and as I was looking through, I was like at least 3/4 of these are all horror films. So it might eventually become Ryan's horror film corner or something. I don't know. We're also doing, little hint, we're doing a horror themed comic later on, so that we are kind of relevant as well. So the films I was looking at was ignore the silence, but there's 2 films I want to mention. One, I can't give too much away because I just want to recommend it without saying as much. It's a film called The Menu. It's on Disney Plus. It's a Fox Searchlight kind of thing where they do like kind of indie-ish films, but it's got big names here. It's got Nicholas Hoult, Anna Taylor-Joy, and what is his name? The British guy, he played Voldemort. Ralph Fiennes.
Ralph Fiennes.
Well, he says Rafe, and it's like, mate, your name is Ralph. All right.
Does he pronounce it Rafe?
Everyone calls him Ralph Fiennes, and it is literally spelled Ralph. He's not a fan of the Ralph terminology.
Ralph's a great name.
Well, I guess if you're an English actor and you're doing Shakespeare, it's like, who is performing Macbeth tonight? Ralph. Exactly. So The Menu, great film. I really enjoyed it. And again, it's, as I said earlier, I want to say as little about it as possible because it's best to go in not knowing as much. The premise, I tell you the premise. The premise is a bunch of extravagantly wealthy people have gone to an island to eat basically what's meant to be the most renowned, private, the most hard to get to exclusive restaurant, and they go to this place, and the head chef, he's renowned but a bit of a recluse and that kind of thing, and it's these people go there, and it's a dinner menu and a dinner, but it's also an experience and that kind of thing. And basically, as you go through it, the lines get blurred in terms of what's an experience and what is real.
Oh, that's cool.
Exactly. And again, I can't mention anymore. I'd love to speak to you about it if you watch it at some point. And we'll have a proper in-depth discussion. But yeah, highly recommend. The one I will talk about a bit more is a film called The Banshee of the Inisherin. I think I pronounced that correctly. I might have butchered the last word there. But it's by, I think his name's Michael McDonough.
Okay.
Who was the guy who wrote and directed In Bruges and Seven Psychopaths.
I love In Bruges.
Yes. So this is, if you like or love In Bruges, you will love this. It's a bit more of a slower burn than In Bruges, but it's a great film. It takes place on an island off the coast of Ireland, which is funny in itself.
Does that have Colin Farrell in it?
Colin Farrell and Brendan Gleeson.
Oh, they're so good together.
Exactly. So they're back together after In Bruges. They play the older men on this island who basically are friends, and then they have a falling out. And
like In Bruges.
Kind of, yeah. It's literally more of like a casual friendship that kind of just ends. And I don't want to say too much about this one, only because it's not much. A lot happens and not much happens, if that makes sense. It's about the characters and the interactions and the dialogue, which are all amazing. It's, again, if you like In Bruges, if you like Seven Psychopaths, it's like that. It's the the interaction between characters. And also there's a really like weird undertone of horror. And I wouldn't call it a horror, but it feels like it almost takes place in purgatory. Like there's that kind of aspect.
Oh, that's interesting.
It also takes place off the coast of Ireland where the Irish Civil War is happening. So it's kind of a period.
Oh.
It's kind of a bit, but it's like the bombs going off literally across the sea. So you can see Ireland across the sea. And you look and there's just bombs going off and they're just these people on this island just getting on with their day because they're not a part of what's happening on the mainland.
They're not a part of the troubles.
Exactly. So I highly recommend. It's good if you have an interest in horror, but you don't like the overtly horror, gore, thriller, psychotic, all that stuff. It's like a really low down. It's someone just best described it as an almost a ghost story.
Oh wow,
I think
that's cool.
That's a good way to describe it. I don't know if there's spoilers or not. If you don't want any spoilers, stop now. 3, 2, 1. There's no ghosts in it, so that's why it's interesting that it gets called almost a ghost story when there's no actual supernatural stuff in it. So, highly recommend. Check it out if you can.
How many emaciated Sinn Féin prisoners out of 5 does it get?
5. 5 out of 5.
5 Sinn Féin prisoners out of 5. I don't know if that's a particularly politically correct scale to use. I don't know if the Irish would be that happy with it.
Well, I was looking at it purely from a metric, obviously, like purely from like it's good, so I'm going to give it the full 5, regardless of what those 5 things are. So that's my film corner done. So we pan across, we sail across the seas to Jamie's comic books without pictures and too many words.
Yeah.
Corner. Sorry, I sounded really deflated when I said the title. To his corner. Go ahead.
So I think I mentioned in the last episode that I'd gotten a really pretty signed copy of the Satsuma Complex.
You have, and I barely remember the synopsis, but that's because of me and my attention span.
Well, I hadn't read it yet.
Right.
So it was by Bob Mortimer. It's like a murder mystery, but a murder mystery that Bob Mortimer wrote. So it's really funny and it's really charming and everything's kind of a little bit serendipitous. And it's his character is a 30-year-old everyman who is a bit middle of the road and a bit average and likes to go on walks and talk to the squirrels.
That sounds like both of us.
Oh yeah, no, it's
like dead on.
It was a really fun little romp, with some really lovely characters, some very well realized characters, and it played with the conventions of a kind of murder mystery novel in a really charming way. So if you've ever read and enjoyed an Agatha Christie and you wished it was written by a surrealist British comedian from the 80s, then the Satsuma Complex is absolutely for you. Before
you start on your next book, I feel like I should mention the fact that I mainly know Bob Mortimer as I think some British public, mainly from like Shooting Stars.
Yeah, where he was brilliant.
I loved Shooting Stars as a kid. I felt like I'd seen other quiz shows, like for the British audience, Have I Got News for You, Never Mind the Buzzcocks, things like that, which were good. And they had like earlier, they're all terrible now.
Yeah.
But earlier on, they were very good, very pushing, whatever. And then by contrast, you had this like thing that felt like only people either loved it or hated it.
Oh, Shooting Stars was so good. Bob Mortimer with his face like a rotten tomato.
Yes.
So funny.
And the pub karaoke round. It's like, what song is this? Like, and if you don't know what we're talking about, this sounds insane.
Yeah. I suppose the other thing that Bob Mortimer is known for more recently is his guy on the train Instagram character.
That sounds interesting.
So he does forward-facing Instagram videos, like really low-budget Instagram videos of him playing the character of a businessman having a really loud FaceTime call on a train. And he's like, yeah, I've been in with Jeff Linton. No, I know, the Jeff Linton. And he always signs off by calling the guy something really silly like a spasticated cormorant. Like that offensive as well. Like, you are, as always, a retarded parrot.
It's one of those things where it's like, you need to know the character is not meant to be like, he's meant to be unlikable.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But I think what was amazing is that character turned up very briefly in the book, and I was like, oh my God, it's the train guy. It's the train guy. So that was really good. That was a really fun read.
Quite progressive for like Bob Mortimer is an older guy, but he's doing cross-platform character universe crossing across his content.
Yeah, no, he really is as well.
How many people can say they wrote a book that has a crossover character from their Instagram content.
Yeah, and there was just enough of it that you knew it was it, but it didn't suck you out of the world. I think one of the most fascinating things is that there is a book that's quite central to the plot called The Satsuma Complex, and he describes his own book. Like, he describes the cover of his own book.
This is sounding a bit like a Tenacious D tribute. It's like this really awesome book called The Satsuma Complex.
No, it's a really crappy book. It's
even better.
It's like a really crappy populist novel called The Satsuma Complex, and he thoroughly describes the cover of his own book, which makes me think, it makes me want to buy the paperback edition if it has a different cover, just to see if he does the rewrite.
I mean, you could Google it, couldn't you? I mean, I don't want to tell a book buying fanatic like yourself. I don't want to give you reasons why you maybe shouldn't buy a book, but you could probably Google it.
A second copy of something I already have a first edition signed hardback of.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, I get it.
And also, this is an intervention. So with your family through the next room, we're going to all come through. We're going to tell you why we don't like you spending your life savings on books.
And then the book I'm currently reading was actually a Christmas gift from my partner.
Right.
Which is a lot less interesting to the wider public, but infinitely more fascinating to me specifically.
Well, luckily, you also listen to the podcast, so that is appealing to currently who is probably our only actual listener.
Yeah, because we haven't published anything yet, so I get uncorrected proofs. It's a book of Norfolk folklore.
Right.
A really big book of Norfolk folklore that I think was published quite cheaply, because I'm noticing spelling errors. Right. And grammatical errors that...
I mean, it's Norfolk, so that could just be the language.
Hey, boy.
Yeah. That's incredibly alienating any other possible who just not in Norfolk. It's like, what?
I reckon, my man, I should do an episode entirely in a Norfolk accent and see what happens.
I think if we get any American listeners, they're going to be like, what's the British accent, isn't it? Like,
they would have noticed.
They don't know the difference.
But no, it's a book about Norfolk folklore, and there's one interesting thing. There's one little anecdote from it that made me chuckle, and it was somebody from the British Museum making their retirement speech. And they said that, I've noticed a lot of people bring artifacts into the museum at the moment, and my curators have told me they're interesting because they're votive. And my understanding of something being votive is that it was pulled out of a bog in Norfolk, which I think is really funny. Votive meaning like sacrificial.
Right.
So an item that you would throw into a river or something to appease or to appeal to a certain deity.
Right.
To a certain pagan deity. But yeah, no, it's been very interesting, and it's been kind of useful research for something that we're going to do together quite soon. And so it's been fun. But thus concludes Jamie talking about the things that he's reading at the moment.
Yeah, the corners have many names. So once we get the theme tune sorted and I can like play them on command or put them in editing, then they'll have cemented names. Interestingly about the Norfolk thing, if people who aren't from Norfolk aren't maybe going to be interested in this, but I always think it's an interesting fact. Norwich, specifically as a city in England, is the only whole city to have ever been excommunicated from the Catholic Church.
Yeah, that did happen.
I feel like that's a good claim to fame.
Pope didn't like us for a bit.
Unfortunately, I think it was for burning alive monks or priests or
there was
something.
A bit of that.
Yeah, there was some kind of human murder going on to elicit it.
We have two cathedrals, don't we?
I did not know that, but go on.
We have two cathedrals.
Is the one was it Grapes Hill?
There's one at the top of Grapes Hill.
Right.
That's the new one. That was only finished in 1922.
Very, very new then.
And then it wasn't consecrated as a cathedral until the 70s.
Right.
So we have one of the newest cathedrals in the country. And it is also the second biggest place of worship in the UK after, not St. Paul's Cathedral, the Catholic one in London. What's the Catholic one in London?
You're talking to the wrong person to ask that question.
Big Catholic cathedral in London is the biggest.
Right.
And then our Roman Catholic Neo-Gothic cathedral is the second biggest. And then we have, the actual cathedral, the really pretty one.
That is the pretty one.
I like churches.
I mean, someone has to, I guess, in this day and age.
Raging atheist loves a good church.
I mean, you can admire the aesthetic. I mean, that's never gone away. So, yeah, I think a good start to the episode. And I also anticipate, and I might be wrong, I anticipate this one being a shorter episode because of the content of the subject we're talking about today.
Because we started late.
We'll go through the night.
Is there any Alan? Very quickly, I just need to check.
Is there any Alan Moore news?
I just need to check. I'm just going to run a quick, apparently Yahoo search because my computer's decided that it wants Yahoo.
I mean, Yahoo decided that you want Yahoo.
Fuck, mate, I don't know how it's happened. I'm just going to see if there's any Alan Moore news.
I mean, I'd like to think I would have seen it because I'm kind of, into all those scenes and stuff.
Alan Moore hasn't done or said anything of note in the past couple weeks.
But obviously, it would have been a bad episode of the podcast if we had not mentioned Alan Moore. So at least we got that done and out of the way.
Well, yeah, absolutely.
Of course. So what we're actually talking about this week is something a little different to what we've done so far of the 5 episodes we've already done.
Yeah.
But we are talking about the Image comic, what technically I would describe as a horror anthology, which is the Ice Cream Man or Ice Cream Man. I don't know if it's the in the Ice Cream Man or Ice Cream Man, but it's Ice Cream Man.
It's just Ice Cream Man.
Sure. So it's an interesting one. It's a little bit different to what we've done so far because, as I said, this is an anthology. So the anthology aspect of it is why I think we won't take as long to talk about it because it's not a serial story as such where we, I think, get more into it.
Yeah.
Like we're only talking about the first 9 issues of this. There was only 5 issues of Rogue Sun, which was the only other kind of modern one that we've done so far.
Yeah.
But that, I felt we got a lot more out of the themes and the story and the characters. Whereas this being anthology and a contained story per issue, I think we could talk a little bit about each issue, but it's also going to be that I don't think we're going to get as deep into it for the exact reason.
Yeah.
I will say the anthologyness of it does create a bit of...
Anthologyness?
Yeah, I made a word. I think the anthologyness of it, I think it does add a bit more unease to each issue and each self-contained story because anything can happen to any character. So like when we were reading Rogue Sun, we know the character's not going to die in issue 3 because he's the main character of the series. Whereas this one, each time you get into an issue, it immediately becomes what's going to happen to these, like anything could happen to this character that I've just been introduced to.
Yeah.
But you also don't have the same weight of, caring about each character. But I think it does a good job in certain issues of making you, just giving you archetypal characters to care about, like whether it's a struggling parent or a young person, like it gives you like, here's a character that you've seen before in other things.
Yeah.
But we're now going to do some fucked up shit to them because the Ice Cream Man's here. I'll give So I went on Wikipedia, as I normally do, but Wikipedia didn't have much on it. So
No, I noticed this.
They had it, but I think that is like, new modern comics, like maybe it just hasn't done enough to elicit, especially, again, with an anthology. It's not elicited enough of a following of the, like an ongoing story.
It was positively received, wasn't it? It has really positive reviews.
So I went to the Image website and got the blurb from there. So whereas normally I would do the movie announcer, trailer voice one, this one, the blurb of this comic sounds a little more like a sitcom being described. So I'm going to do it in a kind of wacky sitcom voice.
Do you have a wacky sitcom voice?
I mean, we're about to find out.
Let's try.
So, chocolate, vanilla, existential horror, drug addiction, musical fantasy. There's a flavor for everyone's misery. Ice Cream Man is a genre-defying comic book series featuring disparate one-shot tales of sorrow, wonder, and redemption. Each installment features its own cast of strange characters, dealing with their own special Sunday of suffering. And on the periphery of all of them, like the twinkly music of the cat's on me, like the twinkly music of his colorful truck, is the Ice Cream Man, a weaver of stories, a purveyor of sweet treats, friend, foe, god, demon. The man who, with a snap of his fingers, lickety-split, can change the course of your life forever.
Lickety-split.
That's his catchphrase.
It is, isn't it?
Very quickly, written by W. Maxwell Prince, with art by Martin Morazzo and Chris O'Halloran. So, And also appreciating, I think the writing is very interesting for...
Well, let's start here. Did you enjoy it?
I enjoyed it. I'll say overall, I liked it, and I think I'm going to continue reading it. I think that's the biggest thing I can give it is I am going to continue reading it. Let's say the biggest kind of hype. I think I enjoyed it more up to issue 5. So I've read up to issue 18. I got a little carried away past. We're only talking up to issue 9 because that's where you got to. And I feel like what I really liked about it when I first kind of got into like the issue 5, between 5 and 10, was that even though it's an anthology series, there's this backstory of the main character, the Ice Cream Man. And when they started revealing that, which we couldn't quite remember if it was issue 3 or 4, but whenever they started revealing that there was this backstory, so the character of the Ice Cream Man, for those who don't know, basically each issue, there's people in a story, and in the story, the Ice Cream Man appears at some point, innocuously enough, and then horrible things happen to the people of the issue.
He did. So one of the things that I did notice is that a character bled from one issue to another.
I did also notice that as well.
Poor Jimbo.
There's actually a couple of characters that appear at different points as I've gone on later, but they don't seem as significant as you might think. It's not like, oh, it's that guy from the... It's more like... It feels more like an Easter egg almost. Like, oh, hey, it's that guy. Rather than like a big, like, oh my God, it's all connected.
Well, because at the end of Jim's story, he gets clean.
Yes.
And then he throws his 1 week chip in the river. And I don't know if... And that's the same river he visited with his girlfriend. And I don't know if that's meant to be symbolic of him kind of throwing that part of his life away, or him deciding to get straight back on Skag.
Maybe. And I do appreciate that.
The ambiguity of it.
Yes, and it's kind of it's what I like about it, and also what I don't like about it, is I like that it doesn't give you like strong, like, and they lived happy ever after, or they all died, or there's no, it's not about what happens.
Well, we know what happens to Jim, because he's one of the guys he's torturing in a further issue.
Yes, it's more about it's about creating a sense of unease, I think, is the best issues are the ones that create a sense of like, I don't feel right. Like this is making me feel, ugh. And it's not overt horror. You're not like, oh my God. But it's, it's at its best when it just creates this like, it's attempting to create an atmosphere of unease, and you're not gonna know what happens next. And that's what I like about it.
Yeah.
But also, again, because there's not hard set stories, it feels almost going against like storytelling convention, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like, all the ones we've done have those kind of storytelling conventions, with the exception of maybe Mouse for obvious reasons, but everything else we've done has a sense of like, but like this happened, and then here's the problem, and then here's the resolution, but there's the ongoing story. Whereas this is like, I mean, one of the issues ends with a guy just turns out he was in hell the entire time, and you're just like, all right, what do I do with that?
Dope.
But it also, again, just makes you feel really off, which I think is the point of horror to a certain extent. And we could talk about each issue, and I think I can mention a little bit about each issue individually, because I feel like there's something to take away from all of them. The
first issue with the spider was interesting, because the spiders then become a motif in issue 9. Yeah,
it becomes speaking as going past issue 9, it almost becomes a symbol of the Ice Cream Man. So they use like spider legs in other things. They do go in quite weird and wonderful directions of like types of stories and how the Ice Cream Man is torturing people, essentially. Yeah. The first issue, I liked it. I liked that it's a morbid story. So what I would say now is, I think we've covered as much as we can without spoiling the first issue.
You're very sensitive to spoilers, aren't you?
Well, I've had it before. I've listened to things and people have just said something, and I'm like, I could have done with a spoiler. So
yeah.
So up top,
spoiler alert.
Yeah, but we're doing this much earlier than with other titles.
Yeah.
But I'm saying now, if you like horror anthology, if you like that kind of thing, give it a read. The best thing about horror anthology as well, to say up top before we break any of the stories, is if you don't like one of the issues, just either skip past it or get through as quickly as possible, you'll probably like the next one.
Yeah.
It's a similar thing with like comedians who do like one-liner jokes. If you didn't like the first one, you like the next one, or you like keep going. And I think that's true for I think anyone who reads this series, they're going to have issues they liked and issues they didn't like as much. So that's the benefit, but also the benefit and the disadvantage of something like this. So all that aside, we're going into each story, so have at it. But what I found weird in that first issue, the story of the kid with the spider, and the spider, basically, it turns out the spider has bit and poisoned
both of his parents.
Both of the parents, so they're dead. The kid's just like, well, shucks. And but what I found weird was the Ice Cream Man is just a werewolf for no reason.
Yeah, I know. But this is something I want to talk to you about.
Right.
But it means jumping to issue 6.
So it does mention the werewolf again, don't they?
Well, I think issue 6 implies 3 distinct timelines.
Yeah, that's a good one. So issue 6, for anyone wants to know, is one character, you see their life go in 3 separate directions, kind of like like choices and multiverse and all that.
Yeah.
3 separate directions, and you see 3 different outcomes.
But there is a scene where he's walking through the park, and the bench in the park is very obviously the bench that Jim and his girlfriends used to go to do blow. And
also, what's interesting, all the issues everything takes place in this one town called Saint Generous?
Yeah, but in issue 6, on that one panel, the top story, you see Jim looking like he's nodding out on that bench. The second panel, you see the guitar player trying to write his hit.
Right.
Like he's there with a guitar, so it would appear that after the end of his story, he started writing again. And then on the very bottom story, you see somebody who looks suspiciously like Rick, the guy who's chasing Rick down.
Yes, who we later find out is Caleb.
Yeah, it looks like Caleb. And so I kind of get the vibe that they're playing with multiple timelines here, which is interesting because they give us 3 distinct timelines. And then in each of the 3 timelines, they give us a character from a different issue that's already passed. And so I don't know if that implies some kind of chronology that we're seeing here, or if it implies different timelines, or if it was just a fun artistic choice because it's an anthology and so they're playing with that.
Well, you've kind of said what I was going to suggest, which is that it's entirely possible that that's the case, but I also think it intentionally as a series, it doesn't give you enough for it to be ever concrete.
Yeah, for it to be any one of those things.
And this is why I said a bit earlier about the difference between signifying things, so recognizing a character and saying, oh, he's from this, so it's taking place here, and it being just an Easter egg. Like, it's just like eagle-eye readers will see that guy was from before, like, and that's it. There's no meaning or anything. Like, that's a possibility.
And this is where an element of challenge comes in for me, somebody who had a formal education in reading story. Because, of course, the way that my brain is trained to read a story is to make inferences from textual evidence. And so if I was writing about this on an academic level, I would absolutely want to take that panel and use it as textual evidence for split timelines and run with that. Because they've given us that. Like that's there in the story. It's printed.
Yes.
And so the argument that, well, it could be that and it couldn't be that, it doesn't matter. And there is a reading of the text where that is true.
And this actually kind of comes back to a larger debate, I think, with like literature as a whole and fiction, where if an author puts a little something in, to what level is it like, well, that must mean something because they took the time to put it in, versus, oh, they just put it in because it was like a fun little tidbit. And
so this is a fun teaching moment. I don't want to call it a teaching moment, but do you know
because you're not technically a teacher.
I'm not technically a teacher anymore. Do you know the death of the author theory?
Yes, vaguely. So it's. I'll give you the layman's for the people who don't know it. Like this, I'll explain on their behalf. So we think it's once a story or fiction or piece of art or anything is once it's published, for lack of a better word, but out in the world, the author's original intention doesn't matter.
Yeah. So, well, it's not that it doesn't matter. It's that the author becomes a reader of their own work and their perspective on it matters as much as any other readers.
Yeah.
It was coined by a chap called Roland Barthes, who comes up a lot in the first maybe month of an English degree.
Right.
And weirdly, psychology and sociology degrees. He was a pretty well published chap, was Roland Barthes. French bloke.
Well, he could have been that much if he was French. But we love the French. I'm just having a laugh.
I believe he wrote in English as well as French. He was a very intelligent guy.
Well, he's definitely more intelligent than me. For my remark, I'll say he's probably more achieved more in life than I have.
And me.
Yes.
And most of us, I would argue, because he's from the early 20th century and his work is still fairly widely read in academic circles.
Right.
And so, yeah, the death of the author theory would suggest that actually intent doesn't matter here. If that's a reading of it that you find compelling and that there's enough textual evidence for to support that reading, then it's as true as any other.
It's just as valid as the author's intended
exactly.
meaning. Yeah, that makes sense.
I think what becomes really sort of problematic there is when a certain author, whose name I won't mention, J.K. Rowling, starts to imply authorial intent onto books.
Starts retconning without actually making new content.
Yeah, when she said, "Well, Dumbledore's gay," and I'm like, "Yeah, but where's the evidence of that?"
Yeah, and what that was, the problem with that, I think, was just that she was like, "Yeah, Dumbledore's a gay character." It's like, you can't have it both ways. You can't you can't write a character almost asexual and then be like, "Oh no, they were gay the entire time," to get the credit of writing a gay character. Like,
absolutely.
If you want that, you have to go full. You have to be obvious.
Yeah, there has to be some textual evidence for it, and there isn't for Dumbledore.
Exactly.
And I would have loved for Dumbledore to be like an out queer man. That would have been fucking marvelous. It would have made those books for me.
Well, so there's a whole thing, and I don't know why we've taken a turn on Harry Potter, but there is a thing with the Fantastic Beasts series, which apparently is not a great film series. I've seen a couple, but the whole point of that is meant to be the character Dumbledore and Grindelwald were very close friends, like really, really close friends who had a breaking up almost of their deep friendship, and now they're enemies. And the hate is so much strong because they loved each other intensely as friends. And it's like, just say they were gay. Just say they were gay and make it interesting.
Fucking love it when academics will be talking about a certain writer and they'll be like, she lived for 20 years in a one-bedroom apartment with her close friend. And I'm like, close friend in a one-bed, was it? Yeah, all right.
There's actually, if anyone is interested, there's a subreddit dedicated to that. It's called, I think, Sappho and her friend. And it's basically like my aunt and her roommate who have lived together for 30 years are attending. It's that kind of stuff.
So
and
good.
It's fun, yeah. So, back to Ice Cream Man. The first issue, randomly, Ice Cream Man's a werewolf. And that, for me, I was like, that fell out of place. And I said, I got to issue 18. They never explained it. They mention werewolves, but there's no explanation for it.
Yeah.
And also, the spider bites the werewolf with enough force to save the police officer character and the child.
Yep.
But then later, the Ice Cream Man's like, "Oh, here's the spider," picks up and turns him into an ice cream. It's like, I fucking love spiders now. It's like, what? Are you superhuman? And it's like, are you superhuman? And if not, why were you affected by the spider bite as a werewolf, but not? And maybe I'm looking for too much continuity in what is meant to be presented as a crazy world where rules don't really matter. This Ice Cream Man world, like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to make sense. And I feel like maybe I'm trying to make sense of it when it shouldn't be, you know?
And this is the thing, isn't it? Where people will make the argument that in a fantasy world, things don't have to exist within a continuity.
I feel like it should.
I agree. I'm inclined to agree with you. I think the best fantasy worlds are ones that are rooted in something real.
Yeah, you have to set up the world's rules and follow them. And if you break them, you have to break them in ways that don't feel like cheap ploys for tension or Deus Ex Machina resolutions or whatever. But yeah, I think it is kind of getting across that this series is meant to be like, there aren't rules. You are just along for the ride. You are experiencing the suffering of the characters. Like, that's why if it was everything worked out, with no rules, then it'd be boring. But because people are suffering in this world of no rules, it becomes a lot more like morbidly fascinating. And I think that's the only way it gets away with it.
Yeah.
So issue 2 was the aforementioned drug story. I thought there was a clever, almost like Twilight Zone twist in this one, which I think I was implicitly expecting from the series as a whole. And it's not that common in these issues, and that's fair enough because I expected it.
It's what you
for
wanted.
No reason. But I thought issue 2 was a good version of that, where there's a couple who are both heroin addicts.
Yeah.
He is so sick from withdrawal that he can't do anything. He's like lying on the bed dying. She is going out to find him some medicine, in quotes, to make him feel better. Then when she gets back after stealing the ice cream van and running amok and getting back, and the police are after her and everything, the ice cream man's there and he offers her some pure grade A heroin. And he says, there's just enough for one. So, do with it what you will, that kind of thing. And then the police come later and she's taken it and she's overdosed.
Yeah.
But then the boyfriend is taken to hospital and saved and goes through the thing of getting his 1 year chip. And then one week chip, and then chucks in the river, so ambiguous ending. But I thought what was clever about it was that by showing the woman taking the heroin, it proved that she wasn't just out there trying to get medicine to make him feel, to save the boyfriend. It was so she could have some as well. Like that was the driving force behind it all.
Yeah, I mean, she's a junkie.
Yes, but I thought it was good that in that moment, the ice cream man was like, made her suffer by presenting her with the choice to have to show her real, intentions.
Yes, absolutely.
And unfortunately, despite the morality of the character, the addiction was always going to win out in the end. And I thought that was a clever twist in a way.
I thought they were a fascinating pair of characters as well.
Yes, well, you don't see much of the man until towards the end, but I think the woman was definitely an interesting and sympathetic character to an extent.
Yeah, I think they were both really sympathetic characters because you see them kind of in the early stages of their addiction where they're using hard drugs, certainly. They're talking about doing keys, so presumably they're doing cocaine. And so you see them doing quite hard drugs but living relatively normal lives whilst they do so. And that scene where they're shooting up together for the first time, I had to stop on that one. Like I found that quite graphic and quite affecting.
Yes, and
I always do with really, really like obvious images or video clips of people doing heroin. I find that really affecting.
Yeah, that's fair.
Because it's such a visceral image, isn't it?
Yeah. I think one thing there's a credit to this entire series, and it just kind of this issue reminded me of it, is they're really good. The writer, and obviously to whatever extent the art as well, but the writers have written it where they can condense story into just like a page of panels.
Yes.
And so it trusts you to kind of know like the tropes and conventions of these kind of stories. It understands like, look, you've seen this story, you've seen like Requiem for a Dream, and you've seen, all the
Train Spotting,
exactly. So you have an idea. So we're going to condense this, trust that you can fill in the gaps yourself, because you've seen it before in longer form, and then we can get to our interesting take on this version of the story. So I think that it's a credit to the talented writing that they know what people know, and they go, right, here's a page, where we are, now we're going to get wacky with it, that kind of thing.
I think the other thing that this particular story really drove home for me is the fact that all human lives are the same to some degree.
I mean, to the ice cream man, they are all playthings.
Well, yeah, absolutely, and that's an undercurrent theme of the whole series, isn't it? But the couple that she ends up running into, and the kind of now elderly, poorly husband whose spine is not fused right, and he's relying on medication to feel comfortable as well. And he's talking about how his pills aren't working, and they work for a little bit, but then they stop helping.
Yeah.
Isn't that just such an interesting parallel to the story of somebody who is locked in substance abuse?
And especially if you know about the opioid epidemic in America, that is literally like a like for like it's part of the entire conversation.
Well, he's taking oxys.
Yeah, and that's how people eventually get to
oxys
heroin.
Are an opiate.
Yeah, exactly. And
they call it hillbilly heroin, don't they?
Yeah, and the number, for anyone who doesn't know, it's shockingly high, the number of people who get prescribed opiates for whatever, surgery, injury, whatever, And then by the end of it, docs go, right, you've had enough now. You've done your course, so you're done. And they just have these intense opiate withdrawals and they try to get oxys to continue, but oxys are so expensive that they then fall back on heroin as the cheaper alternative. And that's how heroin addicts are, how a lot of them are made in America.
Yeah, there's an opiate crisis in the Midwest at the moment, isn't there, in middle America?
I mean, I think it's spread to a lot of America, I'd say, to be fair. But yeah, it was, I don't think it went out of its way to like make a point or anything. I think it was more just like his thematically part of what we're talking about, so is an additional part of it.
It's definitely something I took from it. I found that to be a really powerful analogy between these four characters that ostensibly are living incredibly different lives, but actually are almost caught in that same struggle.
And I think that the benefit of the anthology is that you'll just get a little bit of a snapshot of this theme within the story, and they just play with it a little bit and make you feel uneasy, and then they move on to the next one.
Absolutely, yeah, because even we don't even really see these characters descend into addiction, do we? We see them take their first shot. We see them nodding out on a sofa, then we see them robbing people at gunpoint. Yeah, and I think that's what you were saying earlier about them giving you a well-trodden story and letting you fill the gaps in. Exactly.
It's the same, like, again, with the whole superhero genre. It's like if you're reading a Batman thing and they show a couple at gunpoint and the pearl necklace getting broken, it's like Batman's origin. Like, you don't have to see the whole leaving the cinema and getting to, and all. You don't have to see every that. They just go, snapshot, here you go, you know what this is, let's get on with it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Issue 3, I thought was interesting because, well, for one thing, so there's one point. So the issue 3 is about a old, aging, one-hit wonder rock star. Who wishes he could write a new. He feels like he's got one more in him to get famous one last time, whatever. And he's talking to the ice cream man, who just happens to be in this, was it ice cream parlor maybe, or a diner or something?
He's in a diner, yeah.
And he's talking about how he recorded previous versions of the one hit that he had. And he's talking about, he says, I learned Portuguese so Lisbon kids could sing along. And then the ice cream man says something in Spanish.
Yeah.
Do you know what he says?
No.
I translated it.
What does he say?
So he, with a smile on his face, just kind of in a very whimsical kind of like, hey, I know a bit of Spanish kind of way. He says in Spanish, I will eat the skin of your children.
Val come e pele de sus fijos.
Exactly. And I literally went out of my way to be like, I wonder what he's saying in that. And I Google Translate. I was like, I wonder if I'm on a list now from putting that into a Google Translate.
You are.
Maybe, yeah. But what I found interesting about this one was that the fate of this character was nowhere near as bad as I think any of the others.
He had a wonderful experience as far as I'm concerned.
Well, so what I'm aware, so he basically has a hallucination where he goes to music land where everything is a musical reference because they're on a yellow submarine and there's all Bowie characters.
Well, Ziggy Stardust is quite literally there, as is Eleanor Rigby and Rocky Raccoon.
Exactly. But what happens is he's on this adventure with them, which seems like a dream, and in the
Are we gonna narrate what's happening in the room?
I mean, the cat's on the door, so. But so he's on this adventure, and through the adventure, he accidentally creates this new hit. So it's basically like his old song again, but it's like a newer version of it. So he's like, I've got this new hit, and then he wakes up and he can't remember what the song was, and I'm like, that's not that bad a fate. And for a horror anthology, it's like, oh, I thought of a really good idea in my dreams and I forgot it when I woke up. It's like, that happens to everyone every day.
But I suppose, to go back to issue 6, it clearly consumed him because he's on that bench with a guitar trying to write that song again.
Yeah, but like we know people who are like that. I wouldn't describe them as like being tortured by the devil. Like, we know people in our lives who have done exactly that.
It's a fairly shallow pursuit, isn't it?
Well, not even shallow. I just, again, for what I mean is, for a horror anthology, if you consider the fate of the characters in each one, they vary because some have a bit of traumatic experience. Others end up in hell, for all eternity. And this guy's like, I had that really good idea one time. What was it again? Like his thing was basically the plot of Tenacious D Tribute.
Yeah, fucking A.
And that's what I mean. So that's when I'm reading, I was like, that wasn't that bad. Like, it was a fun story, but I was just like, well, he's fine, basically.
Yeah. They also got something wrong.
And what, a musical reference?
Well, Hendrix's guitar, right?
Trust you to pick up the inaccuracy of the musical reference.
So they flip the headstock.
Right.
Excellent. But they don't flip the rest of the guitar. And of course, Hendrix played a right-handed strung lefty. And so the whole guitar should have been flipped instead of just the headstock. And so I would argue that that is not one of Hendrix's guitars.
Literally unreadable now. Let's just stop.
It really took me out. The lightsaber 2 panels over took me out of it less than Hendrix's guitar being wrong.
I was going to say, yeah, I knew you would get something out of the musical issue, obviously, but I didn't think it would be like a critique as scathing as that. So
0 out of 10
If you're going to do musical references, you got to do them accurately or you don't do them at all.
Kind of, yeah.
So, moving swiftly on to issue 4.
Issue 4 I thought was really good. Can I take issue 4?
Yeah, yep.
Issue 4 is a kind of relatively, just judging by the surroundings that him and his wife are pictured in, and she's his wife, there's a ring, a relatively wealthy man with a pregnant wife who's been asked to go and eulogize his childhood best friend whom he's lost contact with. He, at the funeral, meets his friend's absent father, and they get to talking, and he basically asks him how it felt to walk out on a family, because he's considering walking out on his pregnant wife. And the dad talks about the turmoil that he went through having made that decision, and it ends in them not exhuming, but pulling this lad's body out of the casket so we can give him one last cuddle.
Yeah.
What we discover is that he is in hell. So he was a musician.
Specifically, the person who died.
Yeah, the person who died is existing in hell. And so lots of different things will happen to him. I think the most torturous one is that he was a musician with perfect pitch who could, he's described as being able to listen to a song once and then learn to play it. Very common trait for a talented musician. And there is a scene where an entire brass band are around him playing different songs. And that, for somebody with like really good pitch, hearing dissonance
is the worst torture possible.
Oh yeah, it really is. It would be his own personal hell, I imagine.
I do, yeah. It can seem a bit it could seem a bit less, but if you don't know music or anything, like understated. But yeah, it's good that it makes more sense that it's a personalized version of torture rather than. I mean, they do some generic versions as well, and by generic I mean like when he's getting operated on by dogs.
Yeah,
but yeah, it's good that there's a personalized hell that makes it a bit more creepy. Is probably the best way to put it.
Yeah.
I did really like issue 4 because I felt like that was a bit more of an emotional story. Again, like the other issues, without like any kind of real resolution or anything. But it was emotionally more impactful, especially when did you get to that part? Sorry, the main character's like, I'm thinking of leaving my family as well. And yeah, it was also good about this issue. What I really liked. So I said earlier, I started to like it around this part, around these issues, and that's because of the introduction of the character Caleb. So that is this issue. So at the end of the issue, Ice Cream Man is basically just kind of laughing at whatever horror he's just inflicted or about to inflict or whatever. And then this character, who is basically dressed like the black cowboy from Westworld, is probably the best way to put it. Like literally a black dressed cowboy, and he basically says, "Hey, what do you call him? Ricardus, I think. Ricardus. He calls him Ricardus, and Ice Cream Man is scared of this character Caleb.
Yeah.
And that's the moment for me where I'm like, oh my god, there's something bigger happening, and I was hooked because we'd been 4 issues almost without anything like this. So when they suddenly hint at it, I'm like, what's going on now?
Yeah.
And for the fact of Ice Cream Man as a character basically almost being like the devil or a demon or something ethereal and powerful, for him to be scared of a character, then that's like it flips the convention it's created on its head.
And I think making that character a cowboy is really potent in American iconography. Because the idea of the cowboy in American iconography is very well worn. Putting a cowboy all in black is a potent symbol, isn't it?
Yeah, because you normally, I suppose it's meant to be opposite the white clothing of the Ice Cream Man.
Yeah.
So you're meant to infer from that, I'm guessing, that he's the opposite to the Ice Cream Man, but he doesn't really show it in any actions. So in issues after this, he is kind of trying to thwart the actions of the Ice Cream Man,
and he does successfully in that panel. He's giving an ice cream to a little girl, and she drops it and runs away, or she runs away with it, gleefully back to her house. But he's telling her that he is going to. The vultures are coming to eat your brains.
Right,
is what he's telling her as Ricardus appears. Yeah. And he says, Almighty.
As Caleb appears.
Yeah, as Caleb appears, he says, Almighty, you're still at this shit.
Yeah, and I misread that initially. I literally had to go back and reread it because I inferred Almighty. I was like, oh, is Ice Cream Man meant to be God?
Yeah.
And then I realized afterwards it was a cowboy thing. I was like, oh, Maddie, you still are on for this?
Yeah, exactly.
And I was like, I misread that. But yeah, I was very hooked at this point because I liked the idea of like, oh my God, there's going to be some lore and backstory that we're going to get over these next issues. And that made me far more interested.
Yeah.
Also, I noticed by around this part, the art, and we always have to like take a breath into it. The art, what I think is really beneficial for this is it's unnervingly detailed in like the faces of the characters. And I only realized once I thought about it for a bit, most comic books don't have as much detail. So I thought like I compared this to like Invincible or Saga or even Wide Last Man.
Preacher is the one that it brought to mind for me.
Well, so what I thought of with those other ones, well, the ones I just mentioned, is they have a lack of detail.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Whereas this one, it becomes kind of an unnerving amount of detail in the characters. So the art actually reminded me of an artist who I don't know the name of off the top of my head, but he works a lot with Garth Ennis, who does Preacher and The Boys and a Punisher Max series.
It's interesting that we both thought of Preacher.
Exactly. I think it's similar. It's similar art style, especially on the characters.
Very expressive.
Yes, but to an unnerving degree. And it also has like the crooked teeth as well.
Yeah.
So I think those details, when you're looking at like a terrified character's face and you see the extra wrinkles and the teeth and everything, that makes it more unnerving and a bit more creepy. And I think that's a huge benefit to this title as a whole. So I want to take that to be like the art is perfectly complementary to this kind of style of storytelling.
Yeah, it works, doesn't it?
Yeah. And yeah, it's definitely a similar style to Garth Ennis because he does a lot of like horrible like stories or stories about horrible dark things. So that's why it might be even in like homage to almost or in reference to, because it's that similar kind of themes covered. Although obviously with Garth Ennis, they're normally a bit more like serialized and a bit more like, I would say down to earth, because if you read Preacher, that's about like God and the devil and everything, but just dark stuff in general and like horrible things happening to people, you know.
Yeah, Preacher's a fascinating comic book.
Yeah, we'll do that. That's definitely on the list to do at some point. But yeah, so crooked teeth. So I'm going through my notes. There's one interesting thing. In one of the issues, they talk about missing people, so it's the Ghost Girl issue, I think, right now. One important thing I always like to get across is in the comic, they do that whole like, they talk to the police and the police are like, well, she hasn't been missing for 72 hours. Absolute bollocks. If anyone's missing, if anyone's missing regardless of how long it's been, if it's a time when they should be somewhere and they're not there, you can call the police and be like, this person's missing because they're meant to be here right now. That
was something that happened back in the day, though.
Yeah.
The 72 hours for a missing person is part of the reason that America had so many serial killers in the 60s and 70s.
Yeah. Was it ever actually a rule, or was it? Because
in certain states it was,
yeah. Because what I heard, I think, was less of in some places, I think less of being an enforced rule. There was more of police being like, look, she's only been gone a day. Like maybe she'll come back. You don't know. So let's, rather than waste resources, let's give her a bit more time. So I think it was an unofficially enforced rule, if that makes sense.
It's a compelling rhetorical device.
Yeah,
is
exactly.
What it is.
Definitely, it helps for like why they couldn't just get the police involved immediately.
Yes.
Yeah. But the Ghost Girl issue I really liked as well. I liked that. So there's this girl who had a friend. So she's a child, essentially, and she's a childhood friend who was recently passed from cancer. But
that's the issue after this one.
Oh, wait, what? Oh, we're on the Skyrise one, aren't we?
And instantly, just as a rhetorical device, the guy falling from the... reminded me of that series of How I Met Your Mother, where the whole story is being told in the duration of one slap.
Yep.
Do you remember that?
Yeah, that was last series.
Yeah, the last season that was kind of like a bottle episode.
Yeah.
Because it was all happening in that hotel.
The entire season happened in the hotel,
Yeah, no, the entire season was like a bottle episode.
Yes, yeah.
And it was happening, this kind of felt like a bottle episode. In an anthology which is full of weirdness, so it isn't, but it gave me that feeling because it was messing with the chronology of the actual issue. Yeah. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that one, so in that issue, basically a bunch of people are going mental in a skyrise and start murdering each other and jumping off the building, and a vulture is like eating someone's brains and takes an eye of someone and all that, and there's like everyone's behaving weirdly, and there's one woman who's like not who sees how crazy everything is and is just running away. And the most interesting thing about that issue, and I think it's the reason it was placed here, because it introduced Caleb in the issue before, is you see Caleb actively trying to stop what Rick, the Ice Cream Man, is doing.
Yeah.
So he has literally a crossbow and he shoots down the vulture or something, doesn't he?
Yeah.
And he says to the woman, like, hey, you want to get out of here because, it's crazy in here. So she runs off and she survives, luckily. She's probably going to be killed by the vulture if he didn't help.
Yeah.
But then that's it. That's the only thing to do with this whole larger story of Caleb and Rick and who they are and what they're doing and that kind of thing. So I like that they just give you a little more tidbit of like, there's more to come kind of thing.
And we only really see Caleb at the end. And I think what's interesting here is that we don't see Rick give anyone an ice cream. And the guy who's jumping says lickety split. So It's very clear that he has had an interaction with Rick at some point. But we don't see this character's interaction with Rick. And with all the other characters, we see them interface with him.
Yeah, we have no idea how Rick has done any of this, but also we don't know how he's done anything. So he's just less present. But he is narrating. He is doing all the narration in this one.
Yes.
And what's interesting as well, in the narration, Caleb, I think it's this one or it might be one after, but in the narration at some point, Ice Cream Man is narrating basically evil shit.
Yeah.
And Caleb tells him to shut up. So, like, a character who's there tells the narrator to shut up about what he's talking. So they obviously have some crazy connection that supersedes, like, the normal world and everything, where it might even supersede the fourth wall. Like, they might know their characters in the comic or something, because it's about one character narrating and the other one knowing he's narrating. So I thought that was an interesting twist. So the next one is the Ghost Girl one. Girl who's childhood friend has died from cancer, but she still talks to and sees the friend, and the parents are like, well, she might have schizophrenia, she might be crazy, it might be a coping mechanism, what have you. And then the girl somehow ends up at a chakra house with the Ice Cream Man.
Yeah.
And she walks in and there's a guy on a table who's basically been almost skinned alive.
Yeah.
What I thought was interesting was that he'd almost been skinned alive, except for a bit of skin around the genital area, so they didn't have to show genitals.
Yeah.
I thought that was a weird touch, because, like, it's one thing seeing a man skinless for most of his body, but God forbid showing a cock and balls.
Yeah, disgusting.
That's a weird, comics code of authority
I
hangover or something.
Is, yeah.
Which, I have no idea. Like, I mean, thank God they hid the genitals so we can show our children the skinned man, Like... Good on the old Image Comics, but I thought that was a bit over the top. Like I like the kind of unease, and there's a bit of gore normally. I didn't like that. It's like suddenly like, oh, it's a creepy shack, and there's a skin man. Like that kind of it felt a bit out of place. But what I liked about this issue especially was they never show the ghost, or they never show the girl. They never show the dead girl who the alive girl is meant to be talking to.
No.
And I thought that was good because it it left that part ambiguous as to whether they, she actually was, because at the end she acknowledges the death of a friend, which he hadn't previously.
What's interesting in this issue is that I'm just calling it back up. It's number 4, isn't it? Or number 5?
I think it's number 6.
Number 6. We're on number 6 now. Yeah, we're churning through these. So number 6 isn't. That's number 7.
Oh, right.
Number 6 is the chap who buys 3 scoops.
Oh, yeah. So
the one I've been talking about.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know if it's my favourite. It's the one that I keep thinking about because he gets 3 scoops, 1 chocolate, 1 vanilla, 1 strawberry.
Yeah.
And then the texture of his 3 outcomes are different. And so there is one story where he meets a woman, has a baby that they lose. There's one story where he gets a puppy.
As in, literally finds a dog.
Finds somebody's lost dog and ends up living happily in the woods with it.
Well, specifically, he moves away because he sees missing posters for the dog. And he's like, I'm just going to fucking leave with the dog. And so it's a little dark, but, not too bad.
And then the third one, which is just sheer chaos, where he meets the Birdman.
Yes. Who is the ice cream man wearing a mask, we think?
Well, that was my assumption. And it's in that timeline that we see Caleb.
Yes, exactly.
So in the first timeline where he has the baby, we see a poor Jimbo on the bench. In the second timeline with the dog, we see again the most positive outcome that we saw, which is just this guy who has been given a new lease on life and has been given his purpose back and is trying to write his hit. And then in the third panel, where everything is really fucking messed up, we see Caleb.
Yeah.
And I think that was just an interesting choice.
And Caleb also, the Ghost Girl one, he frees the girl as well, doesn't he? I think.
He does.
So Caleb is popping in and out constantly. I mean, constantly. He's like in every issue from now on, he's kind of popping in and out.
So I don't necessarily think that the suited Birdman is Rick.
Do we think he's a third character?
Yeah, I think so.
Well, in a later issue, I don't know if it's within what we're talking about or one of the ones I went past on, but you see the mask and the suits. They're like hung up on a wall somewhere for some reason.
Oh, right, okay.
But again, that like I said before, that could just be a callback. That could be literally like, hey, remember that? There's one issue very later on where basically it's not even spoiler one, it's the subject of one later. There's an issue later where Ice Cream Man is Superman. And he's in a world where it's like, oh my God, Ice Cream Man. He's like the world's greatest superhero and all that. And there's a woman who's basically playing the Lois Lane character.
Yeah.
And she's the one who's kind of being tortured by this. She's like she knows he's bad and she's trying to prove it. And he invites her to what's his, I can't remember the name, but his version of the Fortress of Solitude. Yeah. And in the Fortress, he has a bunch of stuff from previous episodes, from previous issues. Okay, I'm doing the thing where remember when you were calling Pokemon, was it video game or anime?
I was calling the manga comics.
Yeah. I'm going to have to put in a buzzer for myself.
You're going to have to
every
put
time
in a
I use
ding.
episode instead of issues. I'll go retroactively. I'll go back and do that. But I mean, it's already done because you're listening to the edited
Absolutely,
version.
yeah.
So it's already happened.
Ding.
Yeah. I'm from the future.
Are you listening to the edited issue or the episode?
I mean, of ours is episode. So technically, yeah. Episode of a podcast.
Can we call them cantos instead?
Cantos? What is that? I have no idea what that is.
Just a cheeky little literary reference for anyone that's read Lord Byron.
I mean, it's quite niche. I mean, I'll let you call them cantos. Like, you can call them whatever you want within the confines of the recording.
Absolutely. So in this canto.
Yes. Where was I even going? The Caleb, the man, the references in future ones, they're maybe Easter eggs, maybe they're not. We don't know. But I think I've skipped over issue 8 generally, but I did make one. Well,
we're not on issue 7 yet. We're going to talk about the dead girl now, finally.
I already have, basically.
Yeah, no, so that's issue 7.
Right.
Her dad, bless him.
Yes, I thought that was that was a sympathetic character towards the end.
Yeah, well, he just, he was a normie dealing with some pretty intense neurodivergence, wasn't he?
Yeah, exactly. Didn't know how to handle it, or wasn't handling it the best.
Yeah, and so he was quite aggressively trying to dissuade her of this either delusion, you could call it, or actually just her reality that she was still spending time with her dead friend, and was quite forthright in doing so, and actually a little bit damaging in the way he approached it.
Yeah, and to be fair, you can see the regret of how he'd been handling it. You can see the regret when she goes missing, because then he's like, have I done this? Have I pushed her away? You know, did I make a mistake? So it's sympathetic towards the end.
Did you plot the racial element at play here?
I did not clock it, no.
So what we have here is a brown parent. The mother is brown. The daughter is brown, mixed race. Dad is white. And he's kind of denying parts of her lived experience.
Right.
In a way that white people often do with black people. And so I kind of saw this allegory for race in America and white people not understanding or choosing to not understand the lived reality of being a black American or a black or brown American.
It definitely might be that. I don't know if the subject being ghosts or not ghosts is close enough to that as a subject. And I'm just saying why I didn't see that. Like, you might be, the writer might be like, yeah, that's exactly what I was going for. But I didn't see it only because it didn't feel like he wasn't believing something. It didn't feel like he wasn't believing something that was happening. Because by the end, it might have been her just being, handling it poorly.
At the end, he makes a major concession to her lived experience. He sets a place for her friend. And so it's a growth story for the dad.
Yeah, definitely. And one of the rare better endings for characters in this. So hopefully we never see them again, because otherwise it'll be bad.
Yeah, absolutely. It took Crisis for him to get there, but doesn't it always? But yeah, he made a concession to her lived experience, which I thought was really interesting. I also thought the idea of putting a cat in the soup pot was quite potent.
Yeah, that gets mentioned. That's an ongoing reference.
Because they say that if you deep fry a kitten, it's tastier than fried chicken, right? Or no, a steak dinner.
Exactly. So that becomes a running theme across. That pops up in later issues as well. Again, I think that's just an Easter egg almost. I don't think it's like a lore, aspect or anything.
But it's interesting because I think on a cultural level, we are more attuned to the consumption of dogs because that's an actual thing that happens in the world. And so often if you talk about somebody eating a commonly, a domesticated common household pet, it'll be a dog that they're eating or a rat.
Yeah, it's definitely been chosen to be more creepy and unsettling.
Yeah, and the choice of a cat here, if you think about...
And specifically a kitten, so it's even worse.
But if you think about a cat in iconography and just in folklore and as a totem, cats are often... there are some folkloric examples of people believing that a cat, for instance, has the soul of a witch in it, particularly black cats. And so just the idea of them like some kind of demon or fae boiling and eating a cat is very interesting in that context,
Yeah, and I think the specificity of it being a kitten is what makes it like a more horrific thing to imagine. It's not just an adult cat; it's a baby kitten. That's, I think, was meant to be like a more horror aspect of why he keeps saying it.
And then I suppose the other interesting thing here is that he is quite serpentine.
Yes.
In his presentation here, he's very serpent-like. But then in her illustration of him, he is a straight-up devil.
Yeah.
Like, he is a purple devil. And so that kind of draws into question whether he is being perceived differently by different people. And is she actually seeing... Is that serpentine presentation a construct that he's trying to show her to scare her? And is she actually seeing right through to the fact that he is a horned devil with a forked tail?
Well, we do eventually see what we think might be his true form,
okay.
which we'll get to just in a couple of issues.
I think the symbolism of him taking on a serpentine form is interesting.
Yeah, definitely. It definitely speaks to the devil and all that jazz.
Yeah, and the devil in quite classical Christian iconography.
Yeah,
appearing as a serpent,
Garden of Eden, and all that.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the fact that she is viewing him as more of a Renaissance devil, because that portrayal of devils and angels is very much a feature of Renaissance painting, and it's something that seeped into Christianity from Renaissance painting. And so they're taking two quite distinct and different ideas of the devil from Christian iconography at different points in early Christianity, and then throwing them into one story in this quite playful, charming way because it's a child's illustration.
And it makes a lot of sense. There's the Christian portrayal of the devil because this all takes place in what is essentially Middle America.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that would be her understanding of the devil, wouldn't it? It would be a pointy-horned...
And the portrayal of the Ice Cream Man is the white picket fence, America, Ice Cream Man comes down the corner, residential, domestic kind of landscape. Suburban domestic landscape.
Yeah, sort of middle American suburbia in the 1950s.
Yep, exactly. Are we on issue 8, or did we just talk about issue 8?
We're currently talking about issue 7.
So issue 8, I think, it's the one where people are in an ambulance, aren't they?
Yeah.
So this one's an interesting one because this one, it just seems like everything's going nuts. Like they're driving through town and everyone's going a bit mental. Like there's a lot of random stuff happening. But the ambulance drivers, they're on it. They're taking drugs, like in the ambulance. They're taking prescription drugs and talking about how shit life is and
prescription
all that.
Drugs that they've pinched from the hospital drug cabinet. Yeah, because he takes a bunch of drugs that are meant for people with leukemia.
Yeah, and she's taking uppers or something, I think.
No, he finds some hydrocodone.
Right.
Which is another opiate. Again, opiates very present here.
Well, it's Middle America, isn't it? So
yeah, I suppose, yeah.
The dark side of, just under the surface, the dark things that are happening.
Yes.
I think this is the issue where they mention werewolves. They're like...
Yeah, the werewolf will get him.
Yeah, there's a werewolf running around. And I read that and I was like, so is he a werewolf? Is he not? Or is this just a callback? Like, that's why I was kind of playing that whole, like, am I applying too much meaning to all of this or not? And I think it was just an Easter egg, almost. The interesting thing about this, again, ambulance drivers driving around, taking drugs, doing a bit of crazy shit. Everyone's going a bit mental. And then it turns out at the end, they're literally like, oh, yeah, we've got that guy in the back who has the knife in his neck.
Yeah.
And we should go check on him. Go around the back, and it's Caleb. And they're like, yeah, it's a guy in the back, and it's Caleb. And it doesn't really play too much. I don't know, like, again, am I reading in too much into it? I'm like, okay, Caleb can be harmed, and he might be dying. But then issues later, he's fine again. So past issue 9, again, I read past it, he's just there again. Like, he's fine. So it doesn't seem like he was affected, but for some reason, a knife in the neck was enough for him to be put into an ambulance. So we still, I guess he has the same kind of ethereal powers as the Ice Cream Man, maybe, but,
he's mortal.
Well, we don't know, because, again, he's fine in later issues.
Yeah.
But again, to your point, we don't know when everything takes place. Was this the end of the story, and then everything afterwards happens before this issue? We don't know yet.
Because it does really feel like the whole society is degenerated at this.
Well, is it society or is it this town? Because everything takes place in this Saint Generous town, doesn't it?
Yeah, and what you're seeing is, the clown, poor clown who did all the bad things. Yeah, the dead clown was killed by the werewolf, and we see one of the vultures from issue 5 appear, flying over the city, and everything's burning, and there are cars crashed. This looks like the kind of end of the first act of a zombie film.
Yes.
Where everything's really started to go to shit, but people are still clinging to their suburban lives a bit.
Exactly, yeah. Issue 9, because
there's a couple things here that I wanted to talk about.
Yeah, go ahead.
We've talked about it having that kind of 1950s Middle America suburban aesthetic. And the book is quite timeless in as much as
There's not much technology or anything, is there?
No, but in this issue, we see our first smartphone.
So now it's confirmed to modern day.
Yeah, absolutely. Notably, he's on Twitter. He's on something that is very clearly Twitter, and he's looking at the Twitter comments, and it is noticeably Twitter. I don't think anybody would look at this and argue anything other than that. And so it drags it kicking and screaming into the modern day.
Yeah, which was a choice at this point because we hadn't really, we might have missed something, but we don't think there's been any obvious references before now.
I've been skimming through the episodes.
Ooh,
Wow.
There's going to be another buzzer.
Ding.
I was going to have to give you a different buzzer sound for this episode of the podcast.
This canto.
Yeah.
I've been skimming through the issues while we've been talking.
Right.
And this is the first smartphone I've seen, and it's glare. It gets its own panel.
Yeah. So very obviously, we are in modern day. Look at this.
And the way this is organized is that generally it will be quarter panels,
right,
or thirds. So you either very rarely do you get a full panel. It's either a quarter, like 3 panels going down vertically.
Yeah.
Or a quarter of a page is 4 panels, and you skim left to right, top to bottom. And this gets a full third of the page, the central panel. Like, it wants you to see this smartphone. And it's just some Twitter comments saying, fuck you, you're a snowflake. Yeah, fuck you, you're poor and an idiot, you're ugly and a snowflake. Like, it's very generic comment stuff. But it's in quite a dark, dreary panel. It's all blues and purples because it's nighttime. And then you've got this bright white phone screen in a central panel. They want you to see it.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think this issue really gave me a sense of kind of the current state of things, people being really disillusioned. And I think there's a guy robbing a diner and he just says, I hate my neighbours. And that's my whole life, people are telling me what to do. I hate my neighbours. And that's his reason for robbing this diner at gunpoint.
But then the twist, like a mini twist, is he there to rob it?
No, he's not, is he?
No, he goes in with a mask, pulls the mask up, and then shoots himself.
And you get this really graphic.
And the fact that when a robbery's happening, the paramedics just like, well, looks like the bill's been taken care of. Let's get out of here. Like, but not even in like a almost comedic way. It's like we don't care about what's going on kind of way.
But then again, there's this real sense that everything's degenerated at this point. Like, in the panel where he approaches the waiter, in the background, you can see somebody with a cleaver and blood spraying off it.
Yeah.
And there's 2 blokes playing Five Finger.
Yeah. Well, they're playing put the fork through your hand. Like, that's the goal of you think that one of them's failed. And the other guy's like, no, that's not how you do it. This is how you do it. And he just impales his own hand. And the other guy's like, yeah, that's how you do it.
Like, society has really crumbled in this town at this point.
Well, this is what I was saying about everything seems to be going mental around the paramedics driving around.
Yeah.
And again, as I keep saying in this episode, am I reading too much into it, or is this the devolution of the town? Is that because of the Ice Cream Man and his effect on everyone? Or is it the world is fucked and it's a representation of it being fucked? And the Ice Cream Man is kind of just taking advantage. He's like slipping in the cracks and making it worse for individuals.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I'm reading too much into it or not. It seems very out of place for everything just to be crazy for no reason.
This issue felt like a turning point for me.
Well, this and the issue after, especially. So the reason, are we good to move on to the last issue we're going to be talking about?
I think so, yeah.
Well, so the reason so we spoke beforehand and I said, how many have you done? And you, 5 or 6, I think.
Yeah.
And I said, as long as you get to issue 9, so we can talk about that.
We're golden.
And I think that's a good point to end on, because issue 9, I would say, is the most important issue, even though that I've read, getting to issue 18. I'd say issue 9 is the most important because it's the story of Caleb and Ricardus.
Yeah.
And it's them in a different world, and they seem to be, so it's them in this world, they both speak to, I think they refer to him as uncle, an older guy. And the older guy is basically like, we have to basically leave this world and go to a new one again. Like, it's a regular thing they do every once in a while. And Caleb's like, all right, we'll go to this new world. And Rick's like, new world. And he's like, there's a book, here are the rules of the new world we're going to.
Yeah.
So I think I assumed reading it that they're coming to this world, or the world at least that most of the issues are set in. And then there's Ricardus is pissed off about something. Caleb has a dog, who then Ricardus kills and skins and wears the skin of, which is horrible. And then he makes a giant spider. Also, this world has giant spiders. Caleb like rounds them up with like a lasso and like it's normal. There's
something a little bit arachnid about their eyes as well. When they're existing in their own world, they look less human.
Yeah, I mean, it's surprising they're human at all.
Yeah,
in this world. And then Ricardus basically sets a giant spider on the uncle and kills him.
Yeah.
So it implies a lot about their backstory and who they are, but it doesn't give you anything really, does it?
No, the things that intrigued me about it. Firstly, they look a bit elven.
Yeah.
There's something distinctly not human about them. And I think leading up to this, they've both been wearing fairly humanoid skins. And so this cements the fact that they are not human. Again, I'm going to rabbit on about symbolism a lot here, but I think this is playing on a lot of religious symbolism. The wolf and the spider, both powerful symbols.
Right.
The wolf is often used as a symbol for good, I would argue, because of our relationship with canids and our relationship with dogs. The spider is generally something a bit more sinister.
Yeah.
And it's the first time that the Ice Cream Man has had this totemic relationship with spiders from the outset.
Yes.
Whereas now we're seeing Caleb's totemic relationship with the wolf. And then the other thing is that the wolf's called Mother Mary. No, the spider is called Mother Mary.
Right. So religious iconography again?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Mary the mother is a really, really potent symbol in Christianity. She is all that is good, and she is the virgin, and she is a conduit for God and God's will. And for that name to be used for an arachnid and something that, kills and takes life, I just think that's a really interesting choice.
Yeah.
And again, I think further down the line, once we've read a bit more, we'll see what that means and what they're trying to do there.
Well, this is what I keep saying. When I said before, I enjoyed the series from kind of issue 5 onwards because it started implying this backstory and everything. And I really enjoyed issue 9 because it felt like I was finally being given the backstory that I was craving, even if just to a certain extent. Reading past it, it kind of goes into wackier stories. But so up to issue 18, which I'm at, which is almost over 2 years of monthly releases, they go back to kind of being in the background a bit more.
Yeah.
So I'm getting to a point now, and again, I'm probably going to continue it. I want to see what happens, but I'm getting to a point where I'm now getting a bit annoyed at the lack of explanation. And I think there's a balance with storytelling in a case like these where you're giving a little bit of lore each time. That there's a certain point where the reader, I mean, speaking as a reader, I get frustrated of like, come on, like we're into a bit now. Can I have a bit? Can I have a bit more? Can I know what's going on a bit more now? And I feel like but the problem is with things like that, and with a lot of horror, especially if you explain too much, it becomes less scary or less creepy, less unsettling because you're like, oh, they're demons and they have powers, that kind of thing. So it's becoming a test for where I am in it. It's becoming a test of how much you can dangle a little bit of lore and explanation and that how much you can balance it and keep it going before people get annoyed. But then if you give too much, then you can make it less fun.
Yeah, I agree. And issue 9 felt like the point at which clearly we got the amount of backstory we're going to get.
I mean, for now, because I'm an 18, I think there's 30-something issues. Like, I think it's still now being released, which is why we wanted to do this one. We're 5 years in, aren't we? Yeah.
Started in 2018.
Yes. But I'm pretty sure it's still being released, I think.
Yeah.
But it's ongoing. Maybe they haven't done any more lore, but tomorrow there might be an issue where they explain everything. So
and this whole podcast is ruined.
Well, we're explicitly talking about issues 1 to 9. I'm including a little bit more up to issue 18, which has some great issues. There's one I think you'll really enjoy. It's called Palindrome, and the issue can be read front to backwards the same way.
Oh, that's really clever.
Yeah, it's cleverly done. It's not, the story is quite basic and more thematic than
You're getting two of them, so it needs to be.
Well, you're getting the same one backwards, so it gets to a halfway point and then it goes backwards on itself. So the way a palindrome works, it literally has to be the same word in two halves put together. So with the palindrome, it has to go one way and then the other, it goes back in the mirror image almost. So it's interesting. It's definitely worth it. If I can find that one, I'll send you whichever one that is, or like send you the issue number so you can read that one.
Did you know that's a common feature of classical art?
Well, palindromes.
Well, they call them mirror poems and mirror minuets, I think.
Right.
And so you have poetry that can be read forwards and backwards, and that was popular, I want to say Elizabethan era. And then there were famous composers who did mirror compositions that could be played forwards or backwards. But then if two musicians read the same sheet music, one of them reading it forwards, one of them reading it backwards, you could play it together.
Right.
And it would work as a piece of music played both ways.
And yeah, I'd say this is the comic equivalent.
Yeah.
Which is as highbrow as it's going to get in comics sometimes.
But isn't that interesting? They're using a kind of classical medium, like a classical concept.
Issue after this takes place in Mexico, and what's interesting is about half of it is fully in Spanish.
Oh, cool.
And I read it thinking, is this all going to be in Spanish? Do I, am I, is there any point me continuing it if it's all going to be, because will I get anything from it?
Yeah.
And halfway through it, they do start speaking English because there's a English-speaking character who influences the other characters to then speak English for him.
Okay.
But I thought they do spend a lot of time purely in Spanish, and I thought that was an interesting way to go for an issue as well. And again, coming back to the whole anthology thing, they do good experimental things with the stories per issue because they can. Because if one doesn't work out, like if you don't like the palindrome issue, it's one issue. You just move on to the next one. So that's, again, coming back full circle, that's the benefit of this series. You can enjoy one issue, you cannot enjoy another, keep going. Hopefully they'll reveal more of the backstory. We'll see.
So I'm going to give you a scaling question now.
Okay.
I've just thought up. I'm pretty proud of it. How many creepy spider legs out of 8 would you give this series?
Well, I think from what I've read for up to issue 18, I think a good 6 out of 8. I'd say
a good 6 creepy spider legs out of 8.
Yes, I think the reason is it's a bit better than average because I like how creepy it is. Like as we said earlier, I like the horror stuff. So I like that. I think the fact that some issues don't work for me is it's a feature, not a bug of the way its story's told. But again, those negative issues, the ones whoever doesn't like, it's going to be different for different people. But those ones are still going to impact your overall enjoyment. But yeah, it's still quite high because I like the twists and turns and the risks they take in some of the issues. I appreciate that it condenses backstory to get to the weird parts.
Yeah.
I would recommend it. But I would recommend it if you like anthology storytelling or horror or both,
Which is less common these days.
It is, and that's what I think why we were drawn to do this, is because when I told you about it, I think you like just how talking about a different thing.
So for reference, Ryan and I we sat down over lunch and had a conversation, and he kind of pulled out a bunch of current series that he thought looked interesting that we could talk about, and purely based on the one sentence synopsis he gave me, this is the one that I wanted to talk about this week because the concept intrigued me.
Yeah, and I think we've had an interesting time, if nothing else, an interesting time with this.
I had an interesting time reading it. I enjoyed what I read of it.
I'm surprised we've been able to get as much out of this because I said up top this was going to be a shorter episode, and we are at 140. So
yeah, we've kind of gotten into it the way we would get into.
I say 140. There's probably going to be edits, so the actual time that I'm saying now, 140, is probably not going to be 140 on the actual final edited one.
The runtime of this episode, because you're going to be about an hour in at this point, being like, "What's he on about an hour?"
Exactly.
40?
So yeah, it's but we're doing a decent length of time, and I thought we weren't going to have as much to talk about because it wasn't a serial story. Turns
Yeah.
out we had more to talk about per individual issue. And I think that's the difference with serial ones where for like Saga, there might be an issue where not as much happens. So when we eventually get around to talking about Saga, or like we did with Y or League of Gentlemen, there's going to be issues where we don't talk about as much because they're setting up for like the next issue. Whereas this one, we kind of wanted to talk about each individual issue because it had its own unique story.
It's quite dense in theme, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. And I mean, the ultimate theme is just everything sucks and everyone suffers in some way or another.
Yeah.
But few do get out. A few, like we said, like a couple of issues, people get out fine. And that, I think, adds tension. Because then if everyone died or suffered, you'd be a bit more boring. The fact that some people get out, like a horror film, some people need to survive because then it raises tension for others.
And I think what drew me in when I was reading it is that I couldn't tell if the Ice Cream Man was kind of this righteous force that was highlighting people's catalyze, for want of a better word, or if he was this, because he's partly omniscient, isn't he?
Yeah, definitely to an extent.
Yeah, there's something omniscient in him, and I couldn't work out if he was trying to be a force for good and he was bringing bad things upon bad people, but it seems that he's fairly indiscriminate.
Yeah, I think it does seem to be a bit more. It's not necessarily he's punishing the bad for being bad, but he's finding any person and whatever their thing is, whatever their history, past, trauma, whatever. So it can seem like for some that it's kind of righteous punishment, but for others it's kind of like you're picking on someone their weak moment or that kind of thing.
The one other thing that interested me about his character is that he's a bit queer coded.
I think that's the portrayal of the Ice Cream Man.
Yeah, do you know much about queer coding?
What, as in like giving queer characteristics to a character, do you mean?
Yeah, so it's something Disney did a lot.
Right.
Disney would queer code their villains.
Right.
A really great example is Ursula. Ursula has a lot of traits that you would kind of identify with like a butch lesbian. I don't really like that expression. But that was
the stereotypical portrayal.
That was the parlance that was used at the time. Now we would say like a mask presenting queer person, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, she's coded in that way. Oh, who's the evil lion from The Lion King?
Scar.
Scar is queer coded. Scar is very effeminate, and it was kind of Disney's way in a time when homosexuality was vilified.
Yep.
Of using those negative character connotations, but not actually making the characters gay because they would have butted up against some censorship issues.
Yeah.
And there's some of that here. There's this flamboyance to him and this camp that he exudes. Even if you just look at the panel where him and Caleb are being sat down to be told that they need to go to this other world.
Yeah.
And he's kind of reclining in this very sort of showy way. And then Caleb is sat quite steadfast and stoic with his arms crossed. There is a certain degree of queer coding happening.
I think as well, the fact that they obviously brought in Caleb quite early, like issue 4, he is that kind of Clint Eastwood man's man kind of portrayal.
He has a very traditionally masculine presentation.
Yeah, and that is interesting. I genuinely didn't pick up on that, and now that you've mentioned it, it's very obvious now.
Yeah.
So I think the inherent fear that comes with the Ice Cream Man role is it's the stranger who interacts with kids.
Yeah.
And
bit noncy, isn't it?
Well, I feel like that those characteristics as you're talking about, I think this comic is using pre-existing characteristics without intentionally making them queer coding.
Yeah, I don't think that they were making a statement about queer people.
No.
I don't think that's what was happening here, but they were using some of those tropes.
Yeah, and I think they are using them without realizing what they were created in the first place. And I think the cowboy versus what essentially is the devil, I think it inherently has some of that I don't want to go so far as to say homophobic, but you know what I mean? Like it has a bit of that flavor, for lack of a better term, of phobia, because it's based on the American dream 50s thing, and that's built. That is ostensibly, fucking not using words correctly. That is incredibly built on homophobia.
Yeah, there was this demonization of the effeminate man that happened in 19th century and 20th century American media. And the kind of masculinist, steadfast, quiet character was often portrayed as the hero. And then when you were writing a villain, you would make them effeminate because they were characteristics that were seen as negative in a man. And they've done that here. And I think that was a really interesting choice for something that started publishing in 2018. It's not a choice that you would often see anymore.
Yeah. Is it possible? I have a theory that I've just come up with on the spot. Let's see how it goes.
These are my favorites.
I think there might be something to do with portrayal specifically in visual media. So like early film and television. And even plays to just before that, theatre. I think there's something where the male actors who would do those kind of things, if you were the chiseled, masculine appearance and look, like way back, was it To Kill a Mockingbird, Gregory Peck and that kind of thing, they were always the leads for obvious reasons because they wanted to be idolized by the male viewers and the female viewers. And I think by default, the men who didn't get those roles, who were, men in acting and theatre that time, probably were might have been by default more effeminate. Yeah. Not even necessarily gay or straight or anything.
Oh, no, I think, yeah, no, I agree with you. I think a big part of that trope came from the pool of actors they had available to them.
Because there's a similar thing that happens with foreign villains. And Harrison Ford actually made this point. I think someone asked him years ago on a chat show, I think it's Harrison Ford. He said, why is it always Americans are the leads and the heroes, and it's like the British or any other English speaking with an accent was the villains? And he said, because you were putting up a movie in theaters to attract people, you want the American as the hero because you want the American audiences, the largest audience. You had all these great British actors and every other kind of actor who wasn't American, but they weren't getting the lead roles. So the top billing after the hero was the villain.
Yeah,
absolutely. So the villains were always portrayed as non-American because just by default they had these great actors who needed the best roles, but not the top roles.
And you see a certain degree of that in kind of early Gothic American cinema. People like Bela Lugosi, incredible actor, always played the villain. He was the werewolf. He was Nosferatu. He played the demonic character, and he was from somewhere in Middle Europe.
And why the portrayal of Nosferatu and Dracula and Transylvania and all that.
Yeah, exactly. But it was just something that intrigued me, and it was something that we'd not touched on, and it was one of the things I wanted to talk about.
Yeah, no, it's a very interesting point, and definitely intentionally put that way for whatever reason. That can be obviously that can be debated.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I'm very willing to be told that there's not enough textual evidence to support what I'm saying. Like, that's part of the joy of what we do.
Yeah, of course.
But it's something I noticed, and it was something I wanted to bring up and get your thoughts on.
Yeah, no, very interesting. I think we're about to wrap it up, mainly because we've been sitting in a room that we've not been able to have the heating on because of the sound it makes.
Yeah.
And after almost 2 hours of no heating, I think we're starting to freeze a bit. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
British winter and all that. I mean, this episode might come out in bloody spring by the time we start actually releasing episodes, but we'll get there when we get there.
But thank you for listening. I hope you have a wonderful time.
Are you doing the wrap up?
Yeah, why not?
Yeah, go ahead.
So thank you for listening. I hope whatever you're doing, you have a wonderful time in it. And I hope you'll join us next time for more comic book antics.
And soon to be releasing comics and videos. Once we get to that point, I'm putting pressure on myself. April, I think, is going to be the time where they're going to start coming out. Obviously, basically edited towards the start because I'm learning the video editing process as well. But we'll see how they come out.
I've been making TikToks.
Wow.
So if you wanna find that, I don't know what I'm called on TikTok. I don't know what my TikTok is. I'm at Byronic Monkeys on TikTok. If you want to hear me do things on TikTok. It's not fun. It's not a fun journey. It's not a fun place to spend time.
I've got to say, you're not selling it at all. But check him out on TikTok, everybody. Why not? What else have you got to do with your time? Really? Give it a chance.
Bye.
I think that's the end. So thank you for listening, and we will see you at the next one.
Bye.